Hi, this is Thomas Benna, director of One Big Home and founder of the Martha's Vineyard Film Festival. You're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Who doesn't like to take a day off? Bueller? And nothing's more fun for modernist fans on a day off than visiting a modernist house. Today, we welcome House Museum directors Lucia Dewey Atwood of the Eames House in California and Kelvin Dickinson, president of the Paul Rudolph Heritage Foundation in New York City. And now, still sad that Bjarke Ingels never returns his Instagram messages, here's your host, George Smart.
Hi, folks. Bjarke Ingels is the world's hottest architect right now. He's not been named by People magazine as the world's sexiest man. I don't mean that. What you may not know is that his firm, aptly named BIG for Bjarke Ingels Group, is spinning out amazing modernist building projects in cities around the world at a rate of nearly one a week.
Wow.
Most people in the U.S. outside of the design profession have no idea who he is, but you're going to be seeing much more of the firm's projects as they hit the news. Or just Google BJARKEINGELS. Bjarke is the Frank Lloyd Wright of his generation. Less the murders, stealing his client's wife, and his obnoxiousness. He's our number one desired guest, so if you see Bjarke in his office or on a job site, please tell him how much you love U.S. Modernist Radio and have his people call our people. Those people would be me and Tom, because we're pretty easy to find. We'd also love to have Weird Al Yankovic, Ice Cube, and Art Garfunkel, a great crew, because we found out they were into architecture before their careers in music. U.S. Modernist Radio is well into our 6th year recording here at the venerable Soundtrack Studios, plus remotes from New York, Los Angeles, and Palm Springs. We love our 49 listeners, including Fred in New Canaan and Devin in Santa Monica. Your reviews on iTunes, mostly positive, thank you. Your likes and comments at Mr.Modernism on Instagram. And you're signing up for our exquisitely fun, all-modernist trips to London, Oslo, Berlin, Copenhagen, Zurich, Brussels, and Amsterdam via usmodernist.org. I have been everywhere on these trips, and your mind is going to go boom. Oh, thank you. That's great. It's all you can eat. Modernism every day, followed by, at least in Palm Springs, martinis at night.
Yes.
U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Nietzscheha.com and modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In an adventure we are largely making up, modernist realtor Angela Roll dated Harry Potter at age 17 as she attended Le Corbusier High School just down the road from Hogwarts. They never played each other in soccer or Quidditch, but their proms were legendary, particularly the year they did Stairway to Heaven. Although ridiculed by other architecture students for dating a magician, she learned how to conjure up the slightly tipsy ghost of Mies van der Rohe and aced all the exams, becoming class valedictorian. Now, Angela is your best real estate agent with architecture training, giving brilliant advice to buyers and sellers of modernist houses everywhere. Angela Roll is your special agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom. Start booking your plane tickets. As today, we're talking about 2 modernist house museums you'll definitely want to visit. One on the East Coast in New York City and one on the West Coast in Los Angeles. I've been to both, and they are amazing. But first, let's talk about the architects who designed them. Paul Rudolph grew up in Elkton, Kentucky, attended what is now Auburn, then went to Harvard in 1941 to study with Walter Gropius. In 1949, Sarasota, Florida architect Ralph Twitchell offered him full partnership, and Rudolph became a leader of what became known as the Sarasota style of architecture associated with waterside vacation houses. Rudolph moved to Yale to become chair of the Department of Architecture in 1958, shortly after designing the Yale Art and Architecture Building, a structure considered his masterpiece. He moved to New York in 1966, where he remained for the rest of his life. Rudolph continues to inspire generations of architects, but while he was alive, the public did not particularly warm to his large, concrete, brutalist designs, often finding the intense materials to be cold. Rudolph's decline in America was his triumph in Singapore and Hong Kong, where he was heralded and highly sought after by business and industry. Since his death in 1997, the 8-story townhouse, called the Modulightor Building, where he and partner Ernst Wagner lived, has become a gallery and house museum, and it's a thrilling visit.
Charles and Ray Eames were the Kanye and Kim of the 1950s and 60s, internationally celebrated influencers, and they worked in architecture, furniture, industrial and graphic design, fine art, education, and film. Charles Eames was greatly influenced by the Saarinen, Allele, and Arrow, who he studied with at Cranbrook Academy, a.k.a. the Hogwarts of architecture. Yes. After moving to Los Angeles as part of the Arts and Architecture magazine's case study program, Charles and Ray designed and built the groundbreaking Eames House, also known as Case Study House Number 8. The design process between Ray and Charles was strongly collaborative and richly celebrated in every architecture magazine of their day. And here's a tip if you happen to pick the architecture category on Jeopardy! Ray was his wife, not his brother. She designed 26 cover designs for the venerable journal Arts and Architecture and a major part of the Eames furniture advertisements at Herman Miller. They're best known for the Eames lounge chair and ottoman, which is often the very first piece of modernist furniture that people buy. And it's still a bestseller some 70 years later.
Sadly, Paul and Charles and Ray could not join us today, although that would be a terrific interview with the three of them.
Yeah.
But luckily, we have two great people who maintain their respective legacies and continue to educate legions of fans about their work. Lucia Dewey Atwood is granddaughter of Charles and Ray Eames. She is director of the Eames 250 project and administers the Eames House in Pacific Palisades, California, in addition to heading the Eames Foundation. Welcome, Lucia. Kelvin Dickinson is an architect in New York City who has worked on projects all over the Middle East and Indonesia, and he fell in love early with Rudolph's work, becoming a volunteer, then a dedicated volunteer, then, as we all do, a completely obsessed volunteer, and now he's living the dream as president of the Paul Rudolph Heritage Foundation, running point for the house museum called the Modulightor Building. Welcome, Kelvin.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Lucia, before we get started, I understand you were a professional dancer. Is that right?
Oh, that sounds lovely. I wouldn't ever say that I was a professional dancer. I was pre-professional, studying at the San Francisco Ballet School. But I do enjoy the fact that Ray also was not a professional dancer, but she studied with Hanya Holm and with Martha Graham. And it's this idea of just exploring.
Now, when you dance in the Eames house, and I know you do, I know you've snuck in a dance somewhere, what music is playing?
There is a wide variety of music, from Copland to jazz to The Girl from Ipanema.
Great song.
Oh, isn't it fantastic? To these wonderful, wonderful Spanish flamencos. I mean, it is amazing how much Charles and Ray really loved and appreciated music. And in fact, when Ray was studying with Hans Hofmann in New York, we found a bag of ticket stubs from concerts and art shows and music shows. It was mind blowing how many things that she was seeing while she was there in New York City.
Charles and Ray were really one of the first people I associate with being a Renaissance couple, because they were into so much. Tell us a little bit, for our audience who's maybe unfamiliar with them, the range of their talent.
Well, it really is kind of funny to hear that word Renaissance couple, because for them, they were just focusing on doing their thing. They were very idealistic. Their friends were idealistic in the sense they felt that architecture, that rigor, could really change the world. And so they took projects that would be really focused on meeting the needs. And they really explored deeply what a need was so that they could then go and devise a perfect solution. But in order to do that, you have to have exposure to a lot of different things. Their journey was a journey of exploration of ideas. And so when Ray was very young, her father ran a vaudeville theater. And so from a very early age, she was exposed to these amazing fabrics and different ways of entertaining and ways of presenting information. And she decided she wanted to be a fashion designer. And she went to Bentley School of Design, and she studied fashion there. And then she went to New York City because she wanted to see what was going on there, and her family had moved there, and she studied with Hans Hofmann. And she became one of the founding members of the American Abstract Expressionists. And she went to Cranbrook because Billy Baldwin, a good friend of hers, said that was the place to go to really see what was happening in the world. And that's where she met Charles. Meanwhile, Charles was raised in St. Louis, and he really started working at a very young age, around 10, after his father had died, and he had to help support the family. And he started working first sweeping floors in a lighting manufacturer. And then he gradually started doing other things, and he became a draftsperson and then was working with designing various elements. And he worked in a series of different manufacturing buildings. And then one of his companies, the companies decided, well, they'd be happy to send him to engineering school. And he decided, no, he'd rather go to architecture school. So that's where he went to George Washington University, but then withdrew after a few years because he was in a course where he said he was asked to write an essay about one of the most influential architects of the time. And he chose Frank Lloyd Wright. And his professor read the essay and said, Mr. Eames, you'll have to pick a more suitable topic. And then Charles said, well, no, this is really what I think. And so then they went to the dean, and the dean said, well, Mr. Eames, you'll have to, either you have two options. You can either rewrite the essay or you will fail the course. And that's when Charles said, with all due respect, I'll withdraw.
Wow.
And, of course, Washington University at that point was a Beaux-Arts school. And he was very passionate himself about exploring new ideas, new ways of thinking. And when he got married to his first wife, Catherine, their honeymoon was actually to Europe in order to see the new architecture. So they went to the Bauhaus. They really were exploring what was being done. And then, of course, they returned to the United States literally on the eve of the Great Depression. And when Charles...
Always a good time for architecture.
Always a very good time. And Charles, gave it a good try. He basically formed one company that built one house. It folded. He started another one. And, it was a very, very tough time. But, you're talking about influences. And during that time, the family was so broke that he actually left in order to go to Mexico and travel. It was going to be less expensive. He paid his way with sketches, which are really exquisite, of sites or of portraits, and exchanged them for food or for a place to stay. And, it went on for several months, but at the end of the day, what he said he learned from it was that you don't need a lot in order to survive. So therefore, why would you don't take a job just to get a paycheck. Follow your passion. And that was a lesson that he lived, for the rest of his life. And, you see these influences from Europe or from South America, running through a lot of their work and their passion for Japan. I mean, you see so many different influences, but it's the result of really exploring and being open to new experiences.
Let's shift now to New York with Kelvin Dickinson. Now, Kelvin, recently, as in last year, you celebrated Paul Rudolph's 100th birthday with a huge exhibition in New York at the Modulightor Building. Why don't we use that as a starting point to highlight some of the buildings that Rudolph was known for in the U.S. and how that exhibition went?
Sure, thanks. So what we wanted to do for the exhibit was actually have it focused on his work in Asia, because we had a bunch of original drawings that were given to us for the occasion. And what happened was we took those drawings and realized that we had a lot of good drawings for his projects in Asia, but what we really wanted to do was focus as well on his work in the United States, so we created actually two exhibits. The first one being his personal apartment. It was called Paul Rudolph, the Personal Laboratory. And it talked about his different experiments he did for himself with his projects at his own apartment at 23 Beekman Place, and for the Hirsch residence and some other private commissions in the United States and New York City in particular, and in Long Island. And then the second show was focused on his work in Asia, which included some work in Hong Kong and over in Jakarta. So it was interesting that it was kind of a chance to talk about two sides of his work. The one in Modulightor was in our new addition, which are 2 floors we've just completed on top of the original building left to us by Rudolph, using his original drawings for the building that he wanted to eventually construct. So when it was finished in time for the exhibit, we were really excited. And it gives us some gallery space in which to show off the original drawings we have in our collection. And then we had some nights of some exhibits down at the Center for Architecture here in New York, which were well attended by previous people that used to work with Mr. Rudolph or study under him, as well as some people that had the opportunity to modify and renovate some of his existing buildings, because that's always an issue, that people think that his buildings are not easily maintained over time.
Is that true, really? I mean, are these concrete structures hard to keep up?
I would say no. I might be biased, but I would say no. You know, there is some issues where his buildings have not been maintained over time very well. There's a couple of cases. Buffalo, New York has some housing that they are currently trying to tear down by leaving them open to the elements.
That'll do it.
Yeah, that's a pretty passive way of demolition.
Yeah, doesn't cost much to let the weather in and demolish a building over time. And so, and there's some, actually the issue we've got right now for preservation is a building he had done up in Boston, which has a little bit of damage on the outside of it. The concrete needs to be patched, but it can be patched. And it's a misnomer to think that these buildings are, you know, hard to maintain. The truth of the matter is there is so much concrete in them that keeping them is easier than tearing them down, in which case that's what actually saves a lot of these buildings.
Because they are very massive and intense buildings.
Yes. Rudolph was very big. Well, in the period that I'm talking about, in the 60s, he had begun experimenting with concrete after having gone and met with Le Corbusier in his studio in the late 40s and being enamored by what he saw Corbusier was doing with concrete. He later winds up doing concrete work down at Yale and then winds up doing some of it in the United States. So he did get a chance to show off in his middle period his ability to work in concrete, but he's done work all over in different types of materials, not just concrete.
Was Paul hurt that America didn't cherish his work the way they did people like Frank Lloyd Wright and Neutra? I mean, in a way, he was kind of in the same boat as John Lautner, the same concrete boat, if you will, whose advanced designs were not widely heralded until after he was gone.
You know, and that's something, yes, he did live long enough to see some of his buildings torn down, and he did say that it felt like he was losing a child or someone had died every time he saw a building come down. He did have some very strong reactions about his own projects. Sometimes we have a problem keeping up with his project list because if he didn't like something or if he thought people didn't like it, he would just remove it from his list of built projects.
Really?
So every now and then we come across...
A lot of architects do that, turns out.
Wow.
Yeah. So every now and then we come across a new building we didn't know about, which is always fascinating. But, you know, he did know that his people had turned against him, but that just made him feel that much stronger about what he was doing. You know, when they compared in Learning from Las Vegas his work, you know, the old duck versus the decorated shed argument, you know, that really kind of ate at him. And he wound up going and working the rest of his life in Asia primarily, because people over there still stuck with late modernism. They still believed in what he believed in, and they loved the fact that he didn't change his mind every time a new style came out. And so, you know, we're actually, today's really interesting because I had spoken to Ernst Wagner earlier this week, and he remembers very often Ray Eames coming to visit Rudolph in 23 Beekman and the conversations they would have and the debates about architecture and modernism. And that is what's led us to have our own salon series here in our space, talk about modernism and the issues with modernism and preservation and urbanism and things like that. So, that period of modernism where people believed architecture could be used for good, that architecture could change people, is coming back, I think.
Now, that's a question I've always wondered, whether Charles and Ray and Paul ever got together. But you said that Ray and Paul did. Do you know if Charles and Paul did? Either of you?
That I don't know.
That I don't know either. I was thinking it was after that those conversations would have happened after Charles died. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
Because he died in 78?
Correct. And then Ray died 10 years later
10 years
88.
later.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere in the 80s.
But Ray also was very concerned with the conservation. I mean, after all, part of the Case Study House challenge was to use these new materials and processes that came out of the wartime years. So there wasn't as much history of use, and therefore not as much knowledge about how these materials aged as things like stone or wood. And so, she spent a number of years trying to figure out how she could make sure that the Eames house was saved, and ultimately wasn't able to come up with a solution since most of the institutions would only guarantee they would keep it for 10 years. And that's when she handed it over to Mom, Lucia Eames, Charles's only daughter, who then determined that the best way of saving the house was through setting up a foundation so that the house was owned by itself. I mean, the risk, I hear you say that, these structures are being essentially torn down thanks to weather. And it just sends a chill up my spine. It's like in the 80s and 90s when all the modern houses were getting torn down because no one valued them. And it's tragic.
Yeah, it's tough for, I'm sure, you as well as us, you have a house museum, and you have a foundation that's kind of out there to preserve it. It's tough, you rely on grants and funding and word of mouth to get people in to see it, because I think you'd agree with me, that without a house museum, a lot of these people's work would only exist in books as photographs. And I don't think people would understand how important they were if they couldn't walk through the space and see it for themselves.
Exactly. There is an experiential component to a visit that you cannot get from those beautiful photographs. I mean, those beautiful photographs are filtered through the perception of the photographer. And that's different than when you go into the house and you have your own visceral experience in that space.
Right. And that's where I think people realize that Paul didn't do just work. Our building isn't out of steel. And they come to me all the time and say, oh, this building's not made of concrete, because all they think of is Paul Rudolph and concrete.
Exactly. Well, we have a similar thing where people will come and visit the Eames house and go, oh, this is all off the shelf. Wow. And the house is known for being built of off-the-shelf components, because that was how they chose to meet the challenge of the Case Study House program. But having said that, there's a lot of handwork. And so it's fun to see people having that realization.
Yeah.
Lucia, let's talk about the Eames house. And since we're audio, I want to talk about the sound of the house and the property, what you hear when you step onto the grounds.
Well, from my perspective, it's awash with a year I spent in the house as a caretaker after Ray died. And I would wake up in the morning and I would hear the rustling of the leaves. I would hear the bird song. I would see the shadows of the leaves flickering against the ply-on screens, which provided a diffuse light. And I would even at times hear the waves crashing. Even now, when you go on site, you still hear the bird song, you still hear the leaves rustling, but you hear a lot more helicopters and you hear sirens. Yeah. And, it's tough, because part of the magic of this house is the fact that you are in nature, and those reminders of, those intrusions of modern day life, can be jarring. But it is really incredible. And for me, the best part is during a rainstorm, when the rain is pelting the roof and it's playing like a drum. It's fabulous.
Wow.
That must be magical.
Yeah.
It really is. To continue with the Hogwarts theme. Yes, right, yes. Very magical.
Well, and to continue with the rain theme, George is going to go step into the shower, and we're going to pause for a moment.
It's just a mid-episode cleansing.
That's right. He's kind of a clean freak. So while he does that, we're going to pause for a moment of reflection.
peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good. And you love feeling this good. Nichia, 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 Nichia. Say it with me. Nichia. Advanced engineering. Nichia, Nichia. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit nichia.com/US Modernist. Nichia, Nichia. Nichia. That's NICH. Wait for it. A look you'll love. Nichia.
And we're back, sparkling clean. All right. So, Kelvin.
That was like ASR for architects. I love it.
So, Kelvin, you heard that Lucia lived in the house for a year. Have you lived in the Modulightor Building yet?
No, no. Actually, I'm here every day, 6 days a week, so I take one day off.
Okay.
Well, why is it called the Modulightor Building?
Well, that's a very good question. And what a lot of people don't know is that Paul Rudolph co-founded a lighting company called Modulightor. It started in the early 70s in his model shop when he didn't have any work. And he would start experimenting with plastics and bits and parts he would find on Canal Street. And he started making light fixtures and furniture for himself, mostly for his apartment, and then eventually for other people's apartments, and a lot of plexiglass, things like that. And eventually the lighting company took off. And so he got him a showroom down in Soho for a while, and then in the late 80s, the showroom in Soho's lease was up. So he designed a building for them here in what was then known as the Lighting District in New York. And so it's always been a lighting company. The showroom's here. All the light fixtures are made on site, 3 sub-basements and the second floor near my office. And they still make the Paul Rudolph chairs that he designed, 2 versions of them, and some Paul Rudolph fixtures that he designed are still made here, all on site. And the rest of the building is all Paul Rudolph all the time. He designed the building, designed the lighting in it, and we now have the Paul Rudolph Heritage Foundation in it.
So the Modulightor Building is, 11 stories top to bottom?
No, it's actually 6 stories. When Paul was alive, he poured every penny he had into it. He originally wanted it to be a 9-story building, and he started the construction in the late 80s, then the bad economy hit, and he kept running into problems with money just because the economy was bad. And then what happened was the zoning changed. They wouldn't allow him to build such a tall building. And so eventually, by the time he had passed away, he was only able to build 4 stories. And the 3rd and 4th floor are a duplex apartment that was meant for rental to make extra money, because as we all know, architects never have any money. So his way of handling that was to design a rental property for him to make some extra money. And there was always an intention. We had drawings for floors 5 and 6. So Ernst Wagner, when Paul died, left him the rest of the lighting company, raised the money, and built floors 5 and 6. So we're now a 6-story building.
But let's count the other floors too, because there's the roof sort of with 2 more floors, and you got 3 sub-basements.
Oh,
yeah.
So I'm getting 11
yeah,
stories.
Definitely.
So the elevator has 11 buttons.
Yes, it's much bigger than people think.
Yeah.
True.
And it's just fascinating to see it and go on a tour, which we'll talk about how public can do a little bit later.
Sure.
Lucia, the Eames house is how old now?
It is coming up on the 70th. They moved in to the house in 1949 on Christmas Eve.
Big 70?
The big 70, indeed. So we will be celebrating that with a series of talks and special tours of the house and such.
So a house, particularly this house, has faced multiple maintenance challenges, and you all called in the big kahuna the superhero of modernist conservation, the Getty Conservation Institute. So how did that come about, and what were they able to help you do?
Well, we were very, very fortunate because there was an element of serendipity there. Basically, we had reached a point where we had an opportunity to send the contents of the living room over to the LA County Museum of Art for an exhibit as part of Pacific Standard Time, which was a citywide exploration of design in California. And we therefore had to take this opportunity because we needed to replace a vinyl asbestos floor in the living room that was cracking. And while, everything was still safe, you don't want to play with that. So we developed a list of questions, and we asked the folks at the Getty whether or not we'd be able to just simply ask them whether what we were planning on doing made sense or if we were about to really muck it up. And they very kindly said yes, and they put us in contact with Susan.
Yes, you're about to muck it up, or yes, you know what you're doing?
Yeah, right.
Yes, we'll be happy to review it to make sure you don't muck it up.
Oh, good answer.
Okay.
Good answer.
And we did have very good architects, Escher Gunler-Dina, who have done a number of projects with Lochner houses. But at that time, Susan had been brought on board in order to develop this Conserving Modern Architecture initiative. And so they became interested in our project because they already have a great deal of information from, research on desert sites. But here we were right next to the ocean, and they were particularly interested in some findings that we had related to the environmental condition of the house, the humidity, where was the source of water vapor inside that house? And, it just kind of snowballed from that. So they've done an environmental study where they set up a weather station outside, and then we had a period of over a year where monitors were collecting, information about temperature and humidity, light levels. We had an air particulate dust collector. All of these different elements were being studied, and then they brought in a series of scientists who actually wrote an environmental plan that we will be implementing. And then on top of that, when we started this project, there's always this moment where you're going, I really would have liked to study things a lot more. I don't really want to just jump into work. But we knew that we needed to stop water intrusion in the site. And so we were prepared to proceed with very obvious fixes to the steel frame, to put on a new roof, do work of that nature.
Normal stuff, yeah.
And the Getty basically, it works to the highest standards. And that's why we're thrilled to be working with the Getty. And they said, what you really need is a conservation management plan. And there's nothing better than that when it comes to really looking towards the long term. Because the problem with the quick fixes is that you can do a fix with the best of intentions, but you can unwittingly destroy something significant about the site. Or you can do a quick fix and you might have two alternatives and you pick one, but the other one would have been better suited towards accomplishing some other goals.
These sound like the problems that people who restore paintings and other types of art encounter, the sort of destroy it while trying to fix it problem.
Well, what I like about the Getty's approach is that their goal is to extend the life of the materials. And in certain cases, you can't. All materials have a life, some short, some long. And so in the case of that vinyl asbestos floor, absolutely it was destroyed and properly headed to landfill, and then with all the governmental certification. But, we felt as though we were still abiding by Charles and Ray's approaches, in that even though we would prefer to extend the life of the original material, where we can't, we can actually make things work better. And in this case, the Getty was working with us on developing a water vapor barrier system that would not off-gas and destroy the contents of the house over time.
And it should be noted that the Getty also funded this, right?
Well, the Getty has funded a tremendous amount of research. However, we've been responsible for raising over $500,000 to support this work.
Okay.
Now, the Getty Trust provided us with a grant which supported doing investigations of the finishes. And that was amazing because over 90 finishes were excavated and then were chemically analyzed, and cleaning methodologies were at least begun to be explored. And it was really an important task, not only to gain information about, the evolution of the paint through the years, but also just in terms of making sure when we do have to paint that we don't unwittingly use a paint that will actually destroy the underlying layers, causing bubbling or whatever, and weaken the structure.
Kelvin, as you're working to maintain the Modulightor Building, what kinds of challenges are you facing with the materials and the structure?
So most of it has been just keeping it clean. Rudolph had designed the outside to be all one paint color, and thankfully it's a pretty standard off-the-shelf paint color. It's Snow White is the name of it, Benjamin Moore, so that's pretty straightforward. But there is, because it's a steel frame, we did have to replace the windows when we did the work on the upper two floors with insulated glass, which Rudolph notoriously would not use in most of his buildings. So that has been updated. But so far, most of the problems we're having is just with water leakage through the roof. But primarily, the rest of the building is still in pretty good shape. It's not old enough yet to really be too much of a hassle. We've just replaced all the mechanical units for the first time since the building's original construction. So I think we're still in that period where everything seems to be doing pretty well.
It's really frightening, though, how quickly it's as though it's exponential, where you start noticing things and then suddenly a number of systems fail.
Kelvin, you and Lucia, I guess, could tackle this question, because apparently at both of the houses and the places where you share, there's no parking. So what do people do if they're going to plan a visit there by car?
Well, there's no parking at the Eames house because our parking lot is very small, but we're fortunate in that we are able to have people park on the road directly above the Eames house called Corona del Mar. We're very fortunate by that. On the other hand, I'm just thinking that one has to be super careful about this parking issue because you really don't want to upset your neighbors.
No, you don't. So
we're lucky in the sense that we've got 3 subway stops within 10-minute walking distance Uber.
Yeah.
So we don't ever have any problems with parking around here because no one has cars in New York.
All right. Case closed.
Lucia, other than the house that you run, what are your favorite modernist houses?
This is terrible to say, but I love the glass house.
That's not terrible to say. We'll take that.
I just absolutely love it whenever I go, no matter the time. I love watching it change through the time of days. At nighttime it feels different than daytime, and I just love its interaction with the site and the multiple buildings and their different, natures. It's fabulous.
And Kelvin, what about you?
I have to say, I had the exact same feeling when I went recently to go see Falling Water for the first time. That, to me, I consider that to be a modernist building, even though Frank Lloyd Wright, you could debate that maybe. But the experience of walking across the bridge and seeing the house after only having seen it in a picture gave me the same breathlessness that I get when I see a Paul Rudolph building that I've only seen as a picture before. And I think that was fascinating. I also realized now why Paul Rudolph designs part of his buildings so that you bump your head into them, because I think Frank Lloyd Wright had the same idea in his Falling Water.
Yeah, he wanted that experience of opening up when you came in to the room, the compression and decompression, I think it's called.
Yes, but we don't have any waterfalls near us, unfortunately.
Yeah. So you would achieve this by getting a bump on the head? If the house greets you physically? And then opens
I
up.
used to say it's not a Paul Rudolph building if it's not kind of dangerous.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah, in the borough's Welcome headquarters here in Research Triangle Park, there are angled walls. And many of them, if you're not careful, you're going to angle yourself right into a concussion.
That's right.
Well, it's one way of making sure you pay attention and are very present in what you're doing.
Right.
Yes, it's not very friendly to people that are always on their cell phones, like some of them are these days.
Right. I can imagine back in Rudolph's day, you'd have a lot of people at the company first aid station. Lucia, how can people visit the Eames house? What do they need to do?
So really, it's quite simple. If you go to our website, which is eamesfoundation.org, you can go to the Visit tab, and you can look at the kinds of visits that we offer, whether it's an exterior or interior, and you can book your reservation through that. We usually will respond to confirm in some form or fashion, but it's really important for us to make sure that people understand, one, there's no parking. Thank you very much for raising that earlier. But also that there's no photography of the interior. Obviously, many architects like to come to the site and take photographs, but we really prefer people take photographs from memory as mementos of the exterior, since the licensing fees for the use of the interior photographs are part of the support of the Eames Foundation. So it's really just a matter of going online.
Okay. And Kelvin, how about you? How can people visit the Modulightor Building?
Sure. So we have, our website's kind of long, so I would suggest people Google us, but it's just Paul Rudolph Heritage Foundation.org. And on our website, on the front page, we show a list of activities. We include them all over the world, all over the United States, but also in the upper right is our monthly First Friday open house, which we have every month on the first Friday, open to the public, and you can get reservations right through the front page on our website, or see if we have special events, like we're going to have Carl Abbott from Florida come up and speak in December.
Oh, that's great.
About Rudolph at Yale, and that's going to be on a special day. You can get tickets for that as well through our website.
If you want to see all the houses that Charles and Ray Eames and also Paul Rudolph designed, you can go to our archives at www.usmodernist.org/Rudolph or usmodernist.org/Eames. I want to thank you both, Lucia and Kelvin. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us about these great places people can visit.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for modernist houses, and by Nichiha.com/US Modernist. Okay, take us out, Tom.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive Modernist archives to hear past shows, discover 7,000 mid-century houses, and access 2.7 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. You can contact George by emailing george@usmodernist.org or get him on Instagram at Mr.Modernism. I'm Tom Guild. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. That theme song of ours was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Cindy Stratton,
Not her real name.
no, researches guests from her secret modernist lair full of lasers. So look out. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. George and I'll be back soon with another lovingly guided, museum-quality, thoughtfully curated, where is the bathroom, edition of U.S. Modernist Radio. I really gotta go.